Let's begin with, let's turn to page 188. No, excuse me, not page 188. Oops. Excuse me, page 193. Together. May the one whose spirit is with us in every righteous deed be with all who work for the good of humanity and bear the burdens of others, and who give bread to the hungry, who clothe the naked, and take the friendless into their homes. May the work of their hands endure, and may the seed they sow bring abundant harvest. Let us join in the singing of Matovu, the traditional Matovu, page 192. Yeah,
As
just
you
a
started,
traditional.
you threw a loop at me.
Sure. Matovu. Ohalecha Yaakov, Mishkenotecha Yisrael, Matovu. Ohalecha Yaakov, Mishkenotecha Yisrael. And we continue now with Kol HaNeshama, the conclusion of the Psukei de Zimra, the introductory part of the Shabbat morning service, the last two lines in the Hebrew. Excuse me, page 218. Kol HaNeshama Hallelujah, Hallelujah. Kol HaNeshama Hallelujah, Hallelujah. Do this one. Kol HaNeshama Hallelujah, Hallelujah. Kol HaNeshama Hallelujah, 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 And let us continue now with the reading on page 229. In the beginning. In the beginning, even then, a new light was sown for the righteous, a promise that your light would become the catalyst, first for order and then for hope. Author of language and light, help us to use words as you have to cast light into dark waters and draw out justice and truth. Let us turn back now to the Chatzi Kaddish, followed by the Baruch Hu, page 224, and then page 226. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah b'yalma divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayedecho beit Yisrael Bagala uvizman kariv v'yimeru amen. Hadar v'yitale v'yitalal shemei dekudusha v'richu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata ta'amiran bi'alama v'imru amen. Lai, 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 lai. Please rise for the Baruch Hu, page 226. And let us join together, page 230, bottom of the page. Enlighten our eyes with your Torah, focus our minds on your mitzvot, unite our hearts in love and reverence for your name. Then we will never feel shame, never deserve rebuke, and never stumble. Having trusted in your great and awesome holiness, we shall celebrate your salvation with joy. Gather us in peace from the four corners of the earth and lead us upright to our land. For you, O God, work wonders. You chose us. Truly, you drew us near to your great name, that we might acknowledge you, declaring you one in love. Praise be you, Adonai, who chooses your people Israel in love. Baruch atah Adonai, habocher bi'amo Yisrael bi'ahava. Please rise for the Shema, page 232. may be seated. We continue with the V'ahavta, page 234.
ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך וקשרתם להיות על ידיך והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתיכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
And let us continue now with the Mi Chamocha on page 240.
Bailim Adonai, Micha Mocha Nehidar B'Kodesh, Norat Ha'ilot Osefele, Norat Ha'ilot Osefele, Shira Chadasha, Shibchu
Yisrael, Kuma Be'ezrat Yisrael, Uvdeichenu Mecha Yehuda v'Yisrael, Goalenu Adonai Tzevaot Shemo, Kadosh Yisrael, Baruch Atah Adonai, Ga'al Yisrael. Please rise for the Amidah, beginning with the Tefillah, Adonai Sevatai Tiftach, page 242, and continuing through the Kedushah on page 248.
Adonai Sevatai Tiftach, Ufi Agita Hilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu, Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei זוכר חסדי אבות ואימהות, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה, מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן. ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם, ויצרות שרה.
Page 246.
אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי הכל אתה רב להושיע. מחכה חיים בחסד, מחיי הכל ברחמים רבים, צומף נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומחיי אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומי דומה לך, מלך במית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה לחיות הכל. ברוך אתה אדוני, מגייני החול.
Page 248, the Kedusha.
נקדש את שמך בעולם, כשם שמקדישים אותו בשמי מרום, כך כתוב על יד נביאך, וקרא זה אל זה ואמר, קדוש, 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 אדוני צבאות, מלוך הארץ כבודו. אדיר, אדירנו אדוני, אדוננו אדיר, שמך בכל הארץ. ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו. אחד הוא אלוהינו, הוא אבינו ומלכנו, הוא מושיענו והוא ישמיענו, ברחמיו לעיני כל חי. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, ימלוך אדוני לעולם, אלוהי ציון, לדור ודור. הללויה. לדור ודור נגיד גדלך, עוד נצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש, ושבחך אלוהינו מפינו יולמוש לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש.
And we continue in silent meditation, page 250 through page 260, or in your own silent meditations. And when and you may either stand or be seated, as is your custom.
Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yahaseh shalom, Yahaseh shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael.
I think we should read the Torah. I think we should. So let's turn to page 364, the Ki Mitzion. Now we'll need the Plaut Chumashim if you don't have it. They're in the back. I know I'll need one to get the pages and so forth. But please rise, page 360, Baruch Shenatan. Page 366, Baruch Shenatan.
Baruch Shenatan Torah, Torah. Baruch Shenatan Torah, Torah. Le'amo Yisrael be'kedushato.
We continue with the Shema. Page 366.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo. Gadlu Adonai iti, umromam Hashemo yachdav.
Hagevura v'hatiferet.
Adonai hamalakta v'hamid naseh.
Yeah, sure. That's okay. Maybe seated. The Parsha is Truma, and that can be found anybody can find it quickly, that's great. Feel free to, it's in the book of Exodus. It's page 604. So before we, page 604. So that, yeah, page 604. Okay. So before we start the Torah reading, don't want, I think these services that we have are important, regardless of the number of people who show up. And I say that based really more on the following experience that I'll describe. When I was in Lithuania, helping students restore a Jewish cemetery, it would be my practice, if there was such a thing, to go to a local synagogue and pray on Shabbat, because we didn't do any work on Shabbat. Most of the villages didn't have a synagogue because all the Jews had been killed. But in Kaunas, which is Lithuania, was a fairly substantial town, and we were there over Shabbat, and there was active synagogue. There was a synagogue there, and so I went to services, and it was just like any other traditional service. I picked up a prayer book, could follow along. It was fine. They had a wonderful Torah reader, by the way, probably the best I ever heard. And they had 11, 12 people. And I think about that experience, and I think about how important it is that we are all united in spirit, observing Shabbat in some way, that every Jewish institution should represent that and not focus necessarily on numbers. Last night, of course, was wonderful. We had a lovely crowd, and that's always a good thing. But it's not a bad thing if we have a few people, and that we unite ourselves in prayer on Shabbat morning, with all the other Jews who are praying on Shabbat, and regardless of numbers. And I feel that if the Jews of Kaunas, Lithuania, these few Jews that are left there because of what happened, can take the time to maintain a synagogue, which was substantial, and though few in number, came every Shabbat because, well, that's what we do. That's what Jews do. We can certainly, in solidarity, join with them because we share the same heritage. And I think it's important for us to keep that in mind, that we are doing what Jews who have far less resources, far less people, are doing around the world. And though they may not know what we're doing, we should also be aware that, at least for this rabbi, and I think all of us sitting here can gain inspiration from their example. I'm sure that if they're still alive, and I suspect they are, it was not that long ago, that they are right now in the middle of either their Torah service or somewhere in the middle of their service on Shabbat morning, these 11 or 12 men, and davening. The one thing that they did that was different, that we might think about doing, is during the Misha Berach, everybody who got called to the Torah they recited a blessing. Everybody gets called to the Torah. There's a special Misha Berach. So I got called to the Torah because they could tell I was not from there, and they could tell that I was from America. It was obvious. And in the middle of the Misha Berach, they asked me in Hebrew how much money I was going to donate as a result of the honor of getting the Aliyah, and I said Miyad Delarim, and they were very happy with that. That means $100. So I did. I happened to have have some cash, and it went to a good cause, and I figured that Dartmouth can afford it, so, you know. And I'm sure that the president then certainly would have approved. He was a great leader. But in any event, I wanted to share that with you and not have you feel like, well, so few people come. It's important to me as your rabbi that we have that perspective and that we not just be, well, we don't get that many people and so forth. It's important for other reasons that Jewish institutions or a synagogue doesn't exist just for numbers, or our program doesn't exist just for numbers. It exists for uniting ourselves with Am Yisrael, the people of Israel, all over the world. You can follow the reading on page 605. How should we do the aliyot? Should we do it the same way we've been doing it? Everybody comes up and like we said, it's the bracha. Okay, everybody come. Sounds good to me.
Which is the first in the book?
Yes, I do. Page 368 is where it is in the book. And the way I've memorized that page number is that we're going to be having a bar mitzvah fairly soon, and that every lesson we begin with going over the blessings, and he always says, "What page?" And I got it memorized, 368. Okay, so here is so everybody either who does have a tallit or a prayer book, you can do it with a prayer book as well.
Baruch et Adonai Hamvorach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Vayed.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorach Le'olam Vayed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bahar banu min kol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, daber el bnei Yisrael, vayikachu li truma me'et kol ish asher yidvenu libo, tikchu et trumati, v'zot hatruma asher tikchu me'itam, zahav v'chesef unechoshet, utechelet v'argaman, v'tolat shani v'sheish v'izim, v'orot elim me'adamim, v'orot techashim v'yatzei shitim, shemen lamaor, v'samim l'shemen hamishcha, v'liktoret hasamim, avnei shoham v'avnei miluim, lo'efod v'lachoshen, v'asuli mikdash, v'shachanti b'tocham, kechol asher ani mar'eh otecha, tavnit hamishkan, v'tavnit kol kelav, v'chein ta'asu.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu et emet, v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Koach. Please rise. Eitz Chaim can be found on page 374.
It's Chaim healing on the
Machazikim ba v'tom checha neusha d'rachecha dachei noam v'chol netivotecha shalom Ashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuva Hadesh Hadesh Yameinu Hadesh Yameinu Kekedem. Be seated. We're going to continue now with the Misha Berach prayer on page 371.
Misheberach Avoteinu Mikor habracha Leimoteinu. May the source of strength who bless the ones before us help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen.
We pray for the healing of Rhoda Bennett, Paul Bradley, Harold H. Fink, Bruce Mosier, Mark Schoenfeld, Mark Siegel, Glory Weisberg, Valerie Zimmerman, Judy Stein, David Cherniak, Harry Appleman, Sandy Self, Phyllis Feibelman, Dr. John Johnson, Mark and Hetty Blinderman, Barb McGinnis, and Tim Hansen. Anyone would like to include names of those who you know in need of healing?
Misheberach Aimoteinu Mikor habracha Lavoteinu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shelema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
Well, we have a few minutes. I mean, we're near the very end of our service, but I thought I'd give you all an opportunity if you had any questions or any things that you wanted to discuss Jewishly that's happened in the course of the last few weeks, or anything involving the Torah portion, or anything in general. Now would be a kind of nice time to have a little bit of a Torah discussion. So, we read what's called the portion Truma, and it's an interesting portion because first it talks about the voluntary offering that could be made to begin to support the construction of the tabernacle, as well as support the priests who were not permitted to own land, and therefore they were supported by the offerings that were brought to the temple. So the truma originally, at least I think as the Torah describes it, is a kind of free will offering. It became more specific later on. It was defined a little more specifically. But perhaps the key to this week's portion is its context. Because what you have, if you just think about the sequence for a moment, we read Yitro 2 weeks ago, which was the giving of the Torah, the Ten Commandments. Last week we read Mishpatim, which were more detailed laws. And our sages, what they did was they say that each of those 43 or 44 specific laws that are contained in Mishpatim are derivatives of one of the 10 commandments. So they're integrated, so that's how they consider that to be part of the giving of the Torah. If you really want to do an interesting study, and we haven't done it yet, is to go back and look at the number of times that Moses goes up the mountain, comes back down the mountain, and talks to the people, and who says what to whom, who is speaking. And it's a very complicated and very confusing process. When I did when my old Torah, it's still going on, the Torah study group that began 17 years ago, we got stuck on that, on the whole business of Moses going up the mountain. When we see the movie, The 10 Commandments, we think he went up one time and came down. But if you read these portions closely, it's confusing as to who goes up, what they get, what Moses says going down, what God says to Moses. And then what Moses says to the people is a very, very interesting study. Maybe when our Torah study gets to that section, maybe by then I will have sort of mapped it out, and so I can see our group getting stuck, because we got stuck on things that were of far less consequence. We've gotten stuck on them, which is good. That's what Torah study is all about. That's what makes Torah study so engaging, is that what I think is really inconsequential, other people find to be very consequential. And I'm no better, maybe I've studied Torah a little bit more, but I pass over things that people find consequential, and I'm sure I'm saying things that people find completely inconsequential at times. So, there's always that in a group, all you got to do, if you want to know, I'm rambling for a moment, but you'll get a kick. But just go to a board meeting. I've been going to board meetings for 20 years, and the phenomena always amazes me. Things that I think are critical are, going to be a big discussion. We're going to really think about these things closely, pass through like that. I mean, there's no, oh yeah, that's fine, yeah. And then stuff I think, wow, this will take nothing. Like, I don't know, buying, how many pencils do we need for the religious school for the coming year? That can be a whole, obvious things, but that can be a whole debate. And you sit there and you think, just like, but for some people, that's an important topic. And you can't be a rabbi and say, I don't have any time for this. You have to hold your pen to be a board member, to be that. Anyway, so this week's portion, so I digressed for just a moment, a lot, I apologize. Today is now that we have laws, and now that we have the notion of God-given laws. Last night he talked about a higher power. Well, the highest power is God, and our laws are considered to be from God. And any laws that we create, that our rabbis created, still have to be a derivative of something based on the Torah. And while they have jurisdiction to make supplemental laws, they have no right to make laws that are in contradiction to the laws that are in the Torah. So the highest power, borrowing from last night, isn't the Supreme Court. The highest power is God in our tradition as a lawgiver. And the understanding of that, of what those laws are left to us. But the actual laws themselves are considered, whether you want to consider it as a metaphor, you want to consider it whatever, our God-given law. Now that we have that, now we're going to talk about our relationship to God as ongoing. And that's why it's such an important break. We don't get to the golden calf story. We don't get to the golden calf story until after the construction of the tabernacle. And that's in this week's portion. You might have caught it. I read it fairly quickly. I really should have paused and say, pay attention to this. There's just a very short verse, and you see it on the walls of synagogues all over the world. V'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham. Make unto me a mikdash, a sanctuary, so that I may dwell among you. So a sanctuary now is the next step, because we just can't rely on law. We just can't rely as a people on the Torah and understanding Torah. We need a sanctuary space where we can commune with God. We need a place, and that's the message. And you need that before the golden calf. Why? Because you need a place where you can come and say to God, I'm sorry. You need a place of repentance. If you're going to have laws, people are going to mess up. That's just goes with the territory. I've messed up. I think we've all had situations where, God, if I could go back and redo that, that shouldn't dominate your life, but we've all been in situations, and part of that feeling of something is wrong is our relationship to Torah, how we were raised, how we were, what's in our consciousness comes a lot from Torah. So we need a place where we can relate to God, express our hopes and dreams, and a place where we can say to God, I'm sorry. So that's why we have it. This is my rendering. It's not chronology. We need that before. And the golden calf, of course, is the major sin in the entire Torah. That is the terrible. More. So that's what this Torah portion is about. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
We're not the golden calf yet. Something just dawned on me. Maybe it's from the talk last night. So the 20 can't own any property.
Right.
You can't own any. So they're completely dependent upon the people.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting. So it's the priests who can't get political, right? Because they can't own any property.
Right. They weren't supposed to be political. That's correct.
Right.
Yeah.
So, so the thought of owning property and getting rich by owning lots of land, that precludes them from getting that way.
Yeah, the system was set up. Now, it didn't always work. It didn't always work that way, and you study the Second Temple period and you study Isaiah, there was corruption. And that's what they were speaking about. That's what they were speaking out about.
Not to be that way.
Yeah, right. It was, in the ideal world, it was not set up to be political, but it became very political.
So they were the
historically it did.
the leaders. Of course
in fact, at one point they appointed priests that were not Kohanim. Or there was a question about whether they were Kohanim or not.
But I'm just saying, in a perfect world where this was just starting out.
Yeah.
The Kohanim were the leaders. Well,
they were the priests. They were the ones who prayed on behalf of the people to God. That was their function.
The first representatives of the people.
In some sense, yeah. In some sense, it's true.
Keep them pure. Keep them from owning stuff.
Yeah.
This is the first time I ever really thought about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can't own stuff and have power.
Right, and yet,
Eventually, maybe they do, but in the innocence of the beginning, they weren't allowed to.
Yeah, Aaron. Well, in fact, Aaron, who is the father of the high priest. I mean, he was there's discussion in the Talmud that he was more beloved than Moses.
Right,
because he would try to bring shalom between the people. He was very devoted to being not only humble, but trying to bring peace if people were quarreling. So the Talmud goes that why did they mourn for Aaron more than they mourned for Moses? And the answer is because Aaron was a peacemaker.
That's leadership.
Well, yeah. Other thoughts? Other comments on the portion? Okay, it's always good to have words of Torah. It's always good to study a little bit the portion.
That's why I really like what you're doing now. One chapter at a time.
Yeah.
You take the element and more rather than taking a book on shot and you learn how and miss 90% of what you really want to know.
That's right.
Really good.
Yeah, that's when you read these texts closely, you realize how much depth there is and how much there is to really discuss and learn. And I think to some extent it's unique, the way that we study Torah. We're not looking for perfection. We're looking to learn how to act towards one another. And sometimes our patriarchs mess up, and sometimes they're in conflict, and sometimes there are difficulties. And where the literature, I think, encourages us, the Torah encourages us to ask the kinds of questions that we find ourselves asking in Torah study on Wednesday, as one example. And yeah, that's right. That's right. I think one of the difficulties of Jewish education, just Jewish learning, I don't like the word education, like Jewish learning, is that in many instances it stops at 13. Just the nature of our culture with bar mitzvahs and all of that, and the culture we live in, and their intellects continue to develop, right? They go to high school and they learn more and more, but their religious education, how they understand Judaism, still stays at a 13-year-old level. And that's why it becomes so, I would say, not say relevant, but it becomes less relevant in some ways until one day they kind of quote wake up, or we wake up and we realize that there's real depth. That's why I say I've always been so fortunate to have great rabbis who opened my eyes, to what these texts, how these texts can be read and can be understood as real people. Yeah. I mean, especially the rabbi that I learned from when I was at HUC. Yeah. There's reverence for the text, and then there's the reality that these are human beings. It's more about their humanity than it is about their relationship to God and the struggles that they have, the struggles that we all have. And on that level, I think we really connect. Yeah, and I agree with you. That's why you study it one chapter at a time. And even then, sometimes we feel like we could continue on, but then we wouldn't cover any ground. We would still be on Genesis. We'd just be on Genesis 1. Yeah. That's why the other group, I talk about on Wednesday morning, we're on the book of Ruth after 17 years, and we skipped over Psalms and Proverbs. There was a hiatus for a while. Then we reconstituted, and we're now doing Ruth, the book of Ruth, and it's one chapter at a time. Yeah. It's after 17 years, it's a long time, once a week, but people form relationships, and they form relationships to the text. Yeah, I hope that our group will continue. Yeah, and if we do, I'll be, how old? I'll be 86 years old. That's a good age, 86. Any other, I'm sorry. Oh, I still intend to be the rabbi here at that age. I'm not leaving. It's up to the congregation, but Okay, let's continue with the Aleinu on page 586. Please, Rise. Elohim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'ne'emar v'haya Adonai l'melech hakol ha'arem. Bayom hahu, bayom hahu, yeh Adonai echad, u'shemo echad, u'shemo This week we observe the yard sites of Sylvia Gandler-Cohen, Rebecca Etheridge, Sarah Etheridge, Julian Lewis, Willis Darby III, Carolyn Rothschild, and Ronald Rosenberg, and Max Zell. Is there anyone observing a yard site who they wish to remember this time? The Mourner's Cottage, page 598. Yitgadal, Yitkadash, Shmei Rabbah, V'alma divrach chedutei, v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei Shmei Rabbah mevorach le'olam u'lalmei almaya, Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, V'yitadar v'yitala v'yitalal shemei dekudsha b'richu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbachata v'nechemata da'amiran b'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav Hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. May God, who establisheth peace unto the heavens, grant peace and comfort in the hearts of all who mourn, and let us say, Amen. You may be seated. Torah study will be this Wednesday once again at 5:30. Hebrew class is, I think, on Tuesdays at 3 o'clock. And services next Friday evening we'll return to the normal time of 6:15. I want to thank Nate for bringing the schnapps. Oh, Howard brought the schnapps. I stand. Well, there you go. So thank you for bringing the schnapps, which we'll have right afterwards. I think we have to start bringing some, we'll quietly have to bring an oneg, maybe a little honey cake or something like that, But we won't tell anybody. Yeah, we'll.
That article that said it was written by economists,
Yeah.
orientation, that the lockdown is the worst thing that happened to this world in a long time, and that it did not protect the significant amount of deaths they expected. The only difference was 0.2%.
Wow.
That is an economics thing.
Yeah.
Morally or anything.
It's not the more right. The economic perspective. It's we're in strange and difficult times.
She said there's a point too that's about it. I said positive thinking. I like the positive.
Everybody in the synagogue were.
And the John Hopkins medical team was published the fact that masks don't do a thing.
Really?
Taking masks. And why do they use
Oh, paper masks, yeah.
masks?
Yeah, it doesn't help against the Omicron variant, yeah. Well, okay, let's finish on that. Let's finish with Adonai. We can get drunk afterwards, and we can talk about all the problems of the world. And so, you know, I don't know if I've told this story, but when I was in Chicago, when my father passed away, I had to say Kaddish. I went to the Loop Synagogue. I had a job as a lawyer over the summer, so I'd go say Kaddish, and then afterwards they'd bring out the schnapps, and a bunch of old men, I mean, really, myself, I wasn't old at the time. Now, of course, I am, but and they would sit around, and they would, they'd have bagel, and they would have this, right? And they had nothing else to do, so they could sit there and they would get into the loudest arguments you can imagine. You just can't even imagine. And they would curse, and then they were really angry at the reform movement. I don't know, for some reason they'd get off on the reform movement. It was funny. I mean, I'd never got involved, but it was hysterical, actually.
You had the Litvaks argue with the Glistiatas, and nobody agreed.
Oh my God. I mean, just so, what we do is tame by comparison, but they'd come every day. Nobody ever took it. The booze would go off, and they'd come the next day, and they'd daven, and they'd do the same thing. I will say this, that their retirement, that their exercise was getting worked up over issues, and having these very wonderful, loud arguments. It was really quite entertaining. Okay, Adon Olam, let's end on a kind of lively version. Sound good? Adon Olam, I'm sorry, page 625. Adon Olam, Hashem Olam, B'terem kol yitzir nivra, V'yeit nasa v'chatzo kol, Hazai melech, Shemo nikra, V'acharei kichlot hakol, Levado yimloch noda, V'hu haya, V'hu hoveh, V'hu yiyeh, B'tifara. Adon olam Hashem olam, B'terem kol yitzir nivra, V'yeit nasa v'chatzo kol, Hazai melech shemo nikra, V'acharei kichlot hakol, Levado yimloch noda, V'hu haya, V'hu hoveh, V'hu yiyeh b'tifara. V'hu echad v'ein sheni, L'ham shelo le'achbira, B'li reishit, B'li tachlit, V'lo ha'oz, v'hamistar. V'hu eli v'chai go'ali, V'tzor chavli v'yetza Adonai Elohira. Adonai Lama Shem Olam B'Kerem Kol Yitzini Voli Yedasani Etzoko Hazani Lek Shimoni Kla Yaharei Kiktam Akol Livado Yimrok Nuna V'hu Haya V'hu Hova V'hu Yabeti Shabbat Shalom to everyone.